World Vision started about 60 years ago by a man named Bob Pierce, and he was in an orphanage in China where he was speaking and sharing the gospel, and this little girl had been brought to him who had become a Christian and really had nothing because she was beaten and thrown out of her house because of that. And the lady from the orphanage that ran the orphanage said to him, "Bob, what are you going to do?" And you know, he had nothing. And so he reached into his pocket and he pulled out the last $5 that he had, and he gave it to her, and he said, "You know what, when I go home, I promise I will send more." And that became World Vision's very first sponsored child. We have several ways that people can make a huge difference with us, specifically in the area of human trafficking. Our 30-hour famine, a portion of that goes towards protecting children all around the world and helping restore them. We have a program that you can give directly to. It's $1,500, and that will pay for and support a young girl that will go all the way through this program of being rescued from the sex trade and being helped to restore her, to help her psychologically, spiritually, and physically heal in our 6-month to 1-year program. There's a number of ways that a group can connect with World Vision, and one of them is through the 30-hour famine. And it's a really effective way to raise funds and to give towards those issues of poverty directly. A second way to engage with us is by joining the Justice Network, where we'll send you an email at relevant times when things are going on in the political world, and we'll help you get your voice heard. A third way, which is probably one of my favorites, is to sponsor a child. And I know that not everyone can afford the $39 it takes to sponsor a child, but sometimes a group of 2 or 3 will get together and sponsor a child, or an entire youth group or entire class. And we've even known of entire schools that have sponsored a child or 2. And it's just a really effective way of making a difference in the life of one child.
As the Evangelical Fellowship, we're a national gathering place for evangelicals. And when you gather evangelicals together, often a question raised is, what can we do together better than we do alone? If there's a positive answer to that, then there's a need for partnership. So it's a ways of looking, how do we gather together, bringing our respective gifts and abilities, experiences, expertise, and saying this is how we can address together this problem. One of the issues, social issues, that's coming to more and more people's attention is that of human trafficking. And it's something that we thought that we had, you know, even as a global community, had agreed that slavery is bad, and that we don't practice it, and there's kind of universal rejection of it in terms of international law. But it still occurs, and usually its current form is in the form of human trafficking. Men, women, and children, mainly women and children, are taken against their will or under false pretenses and moved across international boundaries and are used either sexually or as labor in ways that is analogous to slavery. Internationally, it's anywhere from 12.5 to 27 million people at any given time, they estimate, are involved in some form of human trafficking. In Canada even, there's not many, but it's a reality in Canada itself. Numbers from upwards to 600 women are at any given time in terms of sex traffic in Canada. And then there's another, they estimate everyone from, RCMP estimates anywhere from 1,500 to 2,200 people who are trafficked through Canada. So the Canada shores on their way to the US. So again, it's clearly an affront to the idea that all people are created in God's image and have dignity and worth and should not be treated as objects. But they are subjects. God sees them as subjects, and we should see them. So you never dehumanize or reduce someone from that full dignity they have.
Because the Salvation Army's beginnings were creating relationships with people and loving people who didn't have rights and who suffered from systemic violence and things like that, it kind of led them, I don't think it was an on-purpose thing, but it led them quite quickly to advocacy and justice. So, for example, some of the first things the Salvation Army did were they ran into a lot of young girls who were prostitutes. And actually Bramwell Booth, who's William Booth's son, so the founder's son, who took over the Salvation Army for some time, he used to go to bed at night, and his wife worked down in the slums with these prostituted women. And she discovered in her work that there were not only women who were prostitutes, which were already problematic, their lives were terrible, but she also discovered there were young girls who were sold into that there was basically human trafficking going on in those days with underage children. The Salvation Army was started by a couple, William and Catherine Booth, in England, and they had this fierce, amazing experience with God, who they understood was big enough and had plans to save the entire world. And so in their day, particularly in England, there was a whole subclass, what William Booth classed as the submerged tenth. So there were 10% of the whole entire population of England that lived like animals. They really did. Like, they didn't go to school, they worked in workhouses, they drank a lot of gin, even little kids. They were put to work, they were sold as slaves. I mean, it was just a mess. And for most of the society just sort of thought they're discardable, they're wasted, they're too hard. And William and Catherine understood in a really cool way, they had this experience with God that was so intense that they believed that he was able to save everybody, and that 10% were part of his chosen people to redeem, and that if God was going to redeem the whole entire earth, he was going to want to start there. I do a ministry among prostituted women in Edmonton right now. We visit exotic massage parlors where loads of single moms and foreign women are being trafficked systemically into violence against them personally, into degrading situations. I want to help. I want it to stop. I want their pain to stop. I don't think people should have to suffer like that. And I don't think people should have to be treated like that. And so I want to stop it. And so it drives me to create means of advocacy and systemic change so that not only they don't have to suffer, but then women don't have to suffer. So advocacy really is just a fancy way of saying being a voice. So originally I started to get involved in advocacy sort of by accident or by a natural course of events. So I was working in the downtown east side of Vancouver, where there's just a horrific violence against women there through prostitution and sexual exploitation. And so because of my work there a few years ago, the Canadian government was looking at legalization and prostitution and whether those things were going to be helpful with each other. And because of my work with the women there, I understood that legalization would just really further increase their pain. And it might make everyone else feel better, but it certainly wouldn't improve their lives. And so I was asked to be a voice for them, and so went to Parliament, to the government, to speak on behalf of the people that couldn't speak themselves, really. So I think every single person can be a voice, right, for people who maybe can't get their voice out. So being an advocate is about speaking up. So there's advocacy that you can do in awareness. So there's like school campaigns that you can do about raising people's awareness about how people are being treated on the earth right now and how it's not okay. There's like amazing biblical precedent of Jesus being a voice all the time. There's this sort of prophetic idea of advocacy in Scripture all the time, that we will speak for those who cannot speak for themselves. It's like a major invitation Jesus gives us to live like him in the world. So advocacy is a big piece of that. And I think political advocacy is to say just simply as a community to the people who govern the community, to say, hey, we've got something to say and you need to listen.